Morning. So today we're talking about world building, which was described by Alex McDowell when he made Minority Report as a kind of framing for how multiple narratives can spring out of one world space and how opportunities might achieve a kind of new storytelling. So based on that, let's start with the first question of how would you define world building in your practice? And we'll start with Rick.
I'm very nervous. For real. Well, I'm going to say what I've said just in the beginning. I'm going to say things I've never said publicly before. And I have this incredible trust that this group actually will understand what I'm talking about in your own terms. Because all the conversations I've had with people so far have convinced me that this is not only the group of the people that are, you know, us who've been doing production design for a while, but the new people who are learning just, you know, to not just do it, but what they want to do. So I want to address, if I may, my part in this as something that, to say a little something, and then we go back and forth, but then I'd like to kind of just come back to a level that I kind of feel that I'd love to express, because I feel like this is a group that might understand what I'm saying, and I think what we would say in our own ways. It will all be different. It's spiritual, it's psychological, it's personal, and it's the journey that's for me lifelong of traveling and imagining. And it's an identity quest to try to know who I am. And now I'm in my 70s, and I know more, but I just still don't know a lot. So now to apply that to the idea of what is world building, I'm just gonna, if I may, just take just a few moments just to say, I start right now with, well, what is the world to me? I have to understand what I'm addressing. You know, it's like a movie or a cinematic experience. So, as it turns out for me, it's not, there is no single world, because there's always two worlds. I have a left far-sighted eye and a right near-sighted eye. They don't see the same thing, ever. So that has to come together somewhere in my brain to be synthesized, but I'm never looking at both of them together. Then I don't see anything. So it's a back and forth and back and forth. And some of you know me well enough to know that I describe between those two polar opposites a minding of the gap, and that's where I find myself. So to take it to this morning, I had a breakfast with Janine, who opened a door yesterday in an afternoon session into those things that can come to you and you don't know where they're coming from, but that they actually are where you're living and breathing with your vision. And then I was talking with Sarah and Katie, and they were bringing up some things that had caught their attention. Space Baby, which you can ask them about. But then I was walking up here, and you know, when we come to that turn where the church is, I heard the sound of the singing. And there was this old woman standing right in front of me, and I nodded to her, and she nodded. Then there was a couple, and then when I sort of stopped and hesitated to listen, she said, go in. I thought, well, I have someplace to go. You know, I'm on the way up here. So I walked around the corner, and I started, and then I thought, where am I going? Why am I not going in? And I realized I could come back, I could take off my hat, and I could go and take a step into the foyer of that church and hear the music. And as I was stepping in, I started to hear another level. So that's one level I'm describing. And I started to hear this other level of sound. It was a beat that was very familiar to me. And then I realized it was my alarm going off. And it was the Beatles, because that's my alarm. And the Beatles song, for those that you know any of the Beatles songs, but the title will say it all. It's a song called "Look What You're Doing." And I backed out of the church, shaken, and then I came up and luckily King and David and Sandy Wasco were there, and I could talk to them for a moment to kind of calm my nerves, but to try to then come up here to address you with all of us, whatever we say in relationship to world building, but at the moment, that's my world. And then it will start from here and now, and what I was reminded about very specifically is that this is Sunday. So, as a lot, I know I've struggled with this all night, I didn't sleep, as to how to say this, and then, you know, but you're going to get a lot from this, I think, because maybe it will help you see what it's really like for even us. I'm sorry.
No, well, what was interesting was I didn't sleep either, and I've been really nervous. And I went for a swim, and I was trying to be all... And then I spoke to Rick, and he said, I'm going to say something really spiritual, and I'm going to say something, is that okay? And I was like, oh my God, it's so hard to articulate world building, you know, like, because I can tell, you know, I'm very good at, well, I think I'm good at saying, you know, like, oh, I do it this way, and this is what I rely on. But actually what I can't tell you is why and how and where it all comes from. And it's a bit kind of, I don't know, it's kind of exposing to say it's kind of like a weird channeling. Like you just have this thing that you go, I need it to be this way, and therefore that's what I'm going to wrap this story, and I'm going to wrap it up, you know, I'm going to wrap these characters in the thing that I see, and I can't get away from, and that's not really world building, but it kind of is. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, I think we're sort of in the same. I've got 5 crystals in my pockets. Yeah.
Cool. What was I going to say? You know, I reckon that we all have the coolest job in the world, don't you think? You know, who else gets to go to work and be paid to design an underwater submarine that goes to the bottom of the oceans, or, you know, some imperial palace in Tang Dynasty, China, some Egyptian pyramid sequence, and, you know, it's just extraordinary. And every now and again, I stand in front of a set and think, how did I get here, you know, and how cool is this to be able to spend my life conjuring up these environments and actually getting them made and working them, and seeing the benefit of all the wonderful creative skills that go into making this happen. And, you know, just from technical to craft to, all, you know, on all facets, it's just an extraordinary journey. But world building itself you know, necessitates a lot of sort of audacity, I think, and a lot of risk and a lot of dreaming, of course, that we've all heard here. And, you know, there's a sort of a, you dig deep for these things, you sort of immerse oneself in the research and all the sort of tangible things that you can think of, but then it's a human process as well. You know, I've been a little bit pigeonholed in some ways into a fantasy world, which is fantastic, and I'm slowly sort of digging my way out of it, doing sort of period pieces and things like that. But, you know, the fantasy world is one in particular that, by definition, is something that we haven't really seen before. It's another world, another planet, another period, you know, culture and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, we go to the movies for a sort of very human experience. You know, we go to be told a story and to immerse ourselves in a world for a couple of hours. But the most successful films, I think, are the ones that talk about the human condition. You know, when you get below that story, the initial story level, it's a human-to-human sort of psychological interaction that we're most fascinated by. So, you know, going back to the fantasy sort of world, all this world building is to do with, its time and place, taking it on a surface level again, world building. But to me, it's finding a way into being able to, tell the story on a deeper level. And, so it's using the tools we have to be able to do that. Hope that makes sense, sorry.
So, to continue on from there, what does being a designer mean to you? It kind of follows on with the whole world building.
I'm going to stay on the same level, and it's all connected, as you know. You know that, and the continuum of all this is I think what we represent here is something that's coming for you as a message about something you already know, and so I'm just going to say a little something and then try to be very specific, because I know Inbal said it's really good when you can be specific. Believing. Do I believe it? And whatever the story is as it's told to me, what part of it can I believe? And then what more work do I need? What more investigation do I need to do to go deeper and deeper in order to understand and then believe it, so that when I'm coming back, I'm kind of one of the first believers, and that's what we know about with the directors. They look into our eyes and they want to know that we believe what they're saying, and that what comes back is actually even stronger than what they put out, and sometimes they see things through our eyes now that help them see their own movie, and they can make a step forward, and then other people can have the marching orders to actually do their jobs. So for me, the process of believing has to do with understanding the story, of course, but I'd like to be specific and address Avatar. And there's a lot of things that can be said about Avatar, and many of them have been said, about the technology of it, the collaboration, the co-designer, Robert Stromberg, who's a brilliant artist, and we had a wonderful time, and the people who we hired that we work with, many of them are making the sequels. So what am I looking for? What I'm looking for, as it turns out, is myself. I don't know how to create a process nor have an image or a design if I can't understand deeply without words what it is I'm connecting with. So because I have the duality that I expressed, I'm always looking for the duality in what I'm hearing from the director and the metaphors that are used to express that duality that come from them. So now we're relating on a level as though we actually are understanding each other. So when I met Jim Cameron, he's quite formidable. And he's not somebody who will open the conversation the way I'm talking now. But that's me, and I need to be authentic to myself. So when I read the script, I could identify early on in what he'd written that he was in one reality and then he'd gone into another reality. So he was in, as it was written at that time, it was all on Pandora, but the part that was in the military industrial complex, that was like where humans could breathe on their own. Outside, they had to have breathing apparatus. So I identified that as a duality. And I identified it with the major cinematic influence on me as understanding what a duality is, and that is the Wizard of Oz. And that's why when I identified that the place where the humans could live and breathe as they normally are, that was Kansas. That's why Quart says, you're not basically in Kansas anymore. You are, but the minute you go out there, you're somewhere else. He doesn't describe Oz as a very friendly place. He says, it's going to, the things out there will, eat your eyes for jujubes. And what you don't see But what I put in there, and then Jim thought, and he's Canadian, he looked at it and said, oh, that's kind of wicked. The way the slats are in the movie, in the window is like this. There's a big air conditioner kind of thing over here. So it really is the American flag. And it's a story of a conscientious objector who objects to what's going on morally to the point that he can switch sides. And now we're into this other duality, a paraplegic in an MRI machine who is projecting himself into another reality in his brain in an avatar state, and he's 9 feet tall, has a tail, and he's blue, and he can run. He's not a leader yet. But that whole way of projecting himself, I understood that. And I'm going to come back to this, but there was a third dimension in that movie, which was based upon what Jim had seen at the bottom of the ocean when he was doing Titanic, which was all the organic bioluminescent life. And he understood that he wanted to bring that message back up to the surface in a cinematic experience for us to see the connectedness that he saw and the fragility of the planet, the life, and then of course once I could identify that, or at least make that into something I was relating to, that's my own fragility, my own vulnerability in this process, because it's very intangible at this point. So that's what the beginning of production design is of a world for me. So what I'd like to do for my part is in a sense to just, rather than spread out and talk about the technological or the collaboration, talk about the journey that I went on in making that 3-year experience of being on that movie. And it's really a process of going deeper and deeper. I know.
So the question was, what does being a designer mean to you? And feel free to take it however you would like.
Well, at the end of the day, I'm a storyteller, and this is the part that I play in telling the story, really. And there's no greater pleasure than finding the quiet things that I can contribute that isn't on the page and that hasn't, that I've intuited from a script and I put it into the world. And I think that really is what I am as a storyteller. And then there's all the other things like, communicator and a conduit and all these other elements to it. But really, I just love participating. It's the bit that I can do in telling a story, the natural fit for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I concur with my two colleagues here on every level. But it's interesting, isn't it? We have our own language that we use in our profession, pictures and elements and colour and textures and all sorts of associative things, metaphors, as Rick said. So it's really nice to be able to contribute to the story on quite a deep level by all these tools we have in our toolbox. And I think over the years I've sort of accumulated a lot of these ideas and tricks from my fellow professionals, and it's good because you're able to communicate on quite a deep level, on a psychological level, and all the different sort of main crafts use the same thing. Like cinematographers have their way of being able to frame and colour and light areas of what we design, and everyone sort of collaborates to be able to bring in this sort of deeper psychological connections with people. So, yeah, hallelujah to you guys.
So let's talk about inspiration. Where do you draw inspiration from, and also how do you find that first image with the director that you use to springboard the rest of the project? If you'd like to start, Rick.
Would you rather start?
Or.
Okay. The inspiration is again, I'm going to, if I may, again, I don't know what I'm doing, but I have an understanding. It's not so easy to, but I think by the end of this, it will be quite fluid on these levels that we're articulating. The inspiration actually comes on this, the way that I'm tracking it now. Remember, I'm going vertical rather than horizontal, which is the inspiration comes in knowing that I have got at least enough confidence to keep going deeper and deeper, and that when I hit the things that I'm the most vulnerable about, that this is an opportunity to face them and to actually contribute to the movie at the same time. So, to go back to Avatar, to try to keep being specific, because I have a left far side eye and a right near side eye, I don't see 3D. Now, you can imagine, all of you, and this is not about budget, being in a screening room with Jim Cameron when everybody's talking about all the 3D interocular effects and what distances they should make everything and how it's working or not working. And so the shot that we were watching specifically, and I'm trying to describe a paradigm shift here from being extremely vulnerable at the thing that I know makes me the most vulnerable, is my vision. And I had eye surgery when I was 2 years old, and I woke up and apparently I tore off the bandages too early. And the nurse came in and said, "Now you never can go home." And then I had to have a second one. But now I'm in a movie in which I'm feeling very vulnerable, and it's about my vision. I can't see what you're seeing, and I know how demanding Jim is about all of that, and it's a reality to him that he's trying to express, but he's also trying to express a dream. And that's where I understood, well, as long as I'm Dorothy and I'm in Oz, I'm encountering this world and I'm trying to understand it. And so the shot, fortunately, that we were looking at was the first shot that had been rendered. And it was of Neytiri when she has the bow and she's deciding whether to kill Jake Sully. And then a wood sprite comes in the foreground in 3D and lands on the tip of the arrow. And something happens in her eyes. First of all, she follows something you can't see and it comes into frame, but you're looking at her eyes. And then it goes to the wood sprite, and then she makes a decision not to kill him. Something has happened, something shifted. Then of course the next scene with him is when all those wood sprites come, and now you realize he is connected somehow to what will later become, that from that one wood sprite, a force that's called Ewa, and that will fill the skies and the ground with nature coming in to push back this assault on it. And because there was so much content there, and because I had experienced the Polar Express and seen the problems that they had with the eyes, making the eyes believable, but I could believe Neytiri's eyes. And she was just humanoid and not human enough that you could, I felt, believe that you understood what her eyes had told her. So that allowed me an access to being, through the eyes, what did she see, and something changed her mind. And that was the signal to me on a message level that I have to please, to myself, it's that little prayer, come up with something that allows me to move forward. And what it was I want to accept the definition. I want to accept the definition of world or worlds. And within it, I want to find myself in a way that I understand. And so my way of taking that next step was to say, we're talking about 3D. And the place that I went to was the place I can see it, and actually I know this is where it is right here. It's my third eye. And that place where those two eyesights cannot come together need to do something else in order for me to find what I should do next. And that's to allow it to be a third eye. And that third eye can go back in. So I'll leave it at this stage of this verticality to say that's where I understood, and KK addressed this the other day in the afternoon session, which I became Jake Sully. That means I wanted to understand what the 3D of the Avatar experience was in the movie and how to depict that. And that was, it's part of the world, but it's not the broad part that normally gets talked about. It's what you're seeing right in front of you, but it's the details that allow you to believe it. And not even just to suspend your disbelief, but to be invited to really believe it. So now and then I can feel a little more secure. And I'll try to explain what the 3D or the third eye came up with as a process and how it manifested itself visually in the movie, so that, and I guess I'm trying to address with all of us, which is those of you who are not working on big budget movies, don't make it about the money in your mind. Make it about whatever is real and authentic to you to discover in this great job that we actually all are able to get some access to.
My inspiration always comes from a connection to the story. Like I actually have not experienced not relating to something that I work on. Like I have to find the in through the story and then work out what I want to tease out. So there's just kind of an impulse thing. And then beyond that, I think there's just inspiration absolutely everywhere. And you kind of, you know, we all are watching and seeing all the time, you know, and looking for the details and the information everywhere. I mean, on this island, we're all looking at, you know, I don't know, the windows or the, you know, arrangement of something and parking it. I park it and think, one day I will recall, you know, and I trust that it will rise again, you know. But essentially, I think that's, I mean, you know, like obviously I do reference and research and all of that kind of thing, but that's all null and void if you don't have the connection, for me anyway. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, great. What I love about the process, as I touched on before, is the collaboration with very creative people, and in particular with the director. And I very much am inspired by auteur directors, those directors like James Cameron, who have a very, very strong personality and a very strong vision for what the film wants to be, a singular take on what the film is. And so I need to have a working relationship on a creative level with the director that I'm working with. And there's usually or I look for an aha moment, you know, like I remember with Power of the Dog that I worked with Jane Campion recently. She bought a certain amount of her own reference material to show me, you know, what she was thinking about, and I at the same time was collecting some images that I had found that I thought related to the script as well, and I found a photograph, an archival photograph, I think it's from Time magazine actually, of a cowboy's hands. They were close up of these working man's hands, and there was this moment that I connected with Jane on this kind of creative level, and that was our favourite image in a way. I sort of put that in the middle of my mood board to refer to. So, you know, obviously it wasn't a piece of design. It wasn't you know, anything elaborate. It was just really a connection point. And I think that was, I can remember back further than that now to the Eye of Sauron on the Lord of the Rings. You know, we all, there's actually very few core creative people on Lord of the Rings, interestingly. A lot of people contributed, but in terms of like the sort of the core group, there would have been about half a dozen of us who would come into a room and, okay, what are we going to do for the Tower of Sauron, you know, and how is that going to manifest itself? Luckily, Tolkien's description of these people and places and things like that are quite elaborate and quite deep, but it's still were just words on a page, and you know, they still needed fleshing out. So you know, thinking about the sort of the logic, the sort of history, the dynamic of all these sorts of things that go in to make this creature Sauron, the eye, got me thinking about the corrosive nature of this eye that's got so much power, that's looking for the ring on top of this tower, that it's eroded the top of the tower away into sort of a blade-like shape. And it was kind of another one of these moments that we could, you know, we thought, you know, that's what it is. It's that shape, you know. It's the horns, you know. That's created from this corrosive eye. I remember pitching to Peter Jackson on King Kong. It was quite early days. He actually wanted me to show him stuff, you know, not too long after I got there. So I was sort of floundering a little bit. But there was this key moment when King Kong had been brought down and captured on the shoreline of Skull Island. And I said to Peter, you know, wouldn't it be amazing to cut from that shoreline to New York City and see the banner, King Kong, King of the World, and so it's turning, you know, this captured poor creature into a sort of a sensational sensation on Times Square, and you know, so, and you know, it's another one of these aha moments, and so I think that they're very powerful for me to make that instant of connection with this auteur director. I hope I've answered the question, Max. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, here we go.
No, that was great. Feel free to.
Can I comment?
Of course, Rick.
Aha. Now, hold on to that. You know what that means. Aha. And we live for that. We are junkies for that. So, but so are the directors. And that's what the aha's about, is that you get that moment and they get you get them, you both got. So that's so important. And then if I may just segue one more level, which is again to something that you said, and I have a thought of that's going to come next, but is it's not so easy to find the words, you know. I mean, because this is like when you're a kid and the parents are saying, use your words. We have all these images. We know how to do that. We're great at show and tell. Everybody here is like king of their class, queen of their class at show and tell. But the question becomes, well, then show me. Don't just tell me, show me. So how are you going to manifest these ideas and these visions, even because sometimes the visions, you know, they come the back of your head or wherever, and they don't have an illustration yet. They don't have the image. You just know it's a vision. So then if you can have some faith that really is something, then the next process, Alex McDowell would call it the realization of that. What you refer to as the manifestation of it. And it's been referred to by others as well. So for me, to take you back into the kind of just linear progression of the journey on Avatar, how was I going to manifest these feelings that I discovered how to be authentic, how it could involve the split, and communicate not just to Jim, but the whole crew. So what I don't know how I came up with the idea, but I started putting up all the research images around the room, and there was on one wall Act 1, then Act 2, and then Act 3, and I put yarn in strips, and then I would put at whatever level. The first level was, you know, Kansas, and then there was Oz, which was the Pandora level with the Na'vi, and then there was the bioluminescent level, which Jim had described in the script as phantasmagoric. And I didn't know what the word meant, so I stopped in the middle when I was reading the script and I looked it up. And it's a wonderful world, a wonderful word. It's a wonderful world. It's a wonderful realm. It's called, it means, as defined, phantasmagoric is as seen in a dream state. So then I went, oh, so this thing he saw for real, he's describing this connected level as phantasmagoric, as seen in a dream. So that was the third level. If you imagine going around the room, you know, the Oz, and then Kansas, Oz, and the phantasmagoric, which is the dream. So then going left to right, that would be over here, it's my right, your left. But that's not bad. The mirroring is another way to get yourself outside of the left brain version. Then I took other yarn, and where I put the pictures was at what level they were at in the movie as you went through the movie. I hope I'm describing that well. And then I took the yarn with the pins, and I would go down and up and down and up, to what level the movie was taking place in. And I put a little card to describe, what the scene was. And not so much like scene 53, it was more like what happens in the scene, if there's a quote from it. And there was a point in the movie where he'd been into the other dimension long enough that it was starting to confuse him as to what was real. His Kansas reality or the Avatar reality in Oz. And of course, that's the point of the movie at that point. You haven't gone off the reservation, have you, soldier? And the answer is yes, he has. And he's going off, and he makes this comment, and it's when it's on his eye, just a close-up, looking in profile, it says, everything's getting backwards and confused. It's as though what's out there is real, and what's in here, meaning the way you're taking it, inside the MRI machine and where it's supposedly normal, is no longer real. But if you actually think about that line, that's the way it always is for most people. Out there is real, and inside here is not real. But we all know that we're dealing with a reality in here now, that as we start to accumulate all these ideas, we're pushing back against the reality. So in that movie, it starts to be confused. So when I brought Jim in to look at that and to take him through his movie in order, but to say these are the levels that I think we're at, and he'd never seen anything like that before. And then the thing that I showed him, just to go back to the very first thing I had said to him, which was, I'd said, it seems like it's the Wizard of Oz meets Apocalypse Now. And those are both journeys. And so that's what I was trying to show him. And then once he said, well, I get this, aha for him too. And he would say things to me a lot of the time, like, I don't know what you're talking about, but I love that we're getting so much done. And so I'd bring the rest of the crew in, and then they could expand upon that and keep the vision expanding. But I just wanted to say the aha, and then how do you manifest it? That seems to be very important.
So Fiona, did you have any aha moments on Cruella, for example?
No. I mean, I don't know, maybe. It's kind of, I don't know, that movie. It was fine. No, I had a nice time. It had everything, But actually, the aha moments and movies for me are the ones where they're a battle. When you've got to fight. Actually, like the best version of that for me was when I did MCBeth. And, we, Australian director, Australian designer, Australian DP, we thought, great, let's go shoot in the UK in winter, all exterior. How atmospheric. And, we also were like, wow, £9 million. Wow. We've hit the big time. So we thought we would do an 11th century accurate recreation. My research was next level. And of course, you know, we got there and, they were just like, I beg your pardon, like, what do you think you're doing? You know, and I was like, I want to build a long haul, I want to do this. And in the end, I had one building that I could build that had a roof. And then we had to basically come up with a version of the world that spoke to the period and the time and the story, and but for not very much money. And so we had to manipulate how we told that story and how we played with the period. And it was the first time in film that I'd done that. I'd done it in theatre, and I hadn't actually considered that I could also do that in film until I did MCBeth. And we were like, oh, okay, we can't afford wood, so let's make it tents. You know, like, they can all be like refugees. You know, there's been all these wars, you know, they're living in tents, but they're better. Like, we just came up with all this logic. And there was this sort of endless aha. You know, like, no money. 9 million sounds like a lot, but it wasn't. But we had woods. So I would go into the woods and it became all about bracken, and I was hiding like tent poles. But it became the language of the movie through necessity. And so for me, that was a more satisfying experience than having all the money I needed and all the amazing people and all of that, because it was like I was in a candy store or something. I mean, it was just great. Cruella was a joy, but I didn't feel like I broke through anything like I did on other movies, but particularly MCBeth, I think, yeah.
Just finally, the aha moment again. It's confidence as well, I think, you know, when you can connect like that. And it just takes a moment to, for me to trust the director, and particularly for the director to trust me, you know, because we don't always know each other at the beginning of a project. And yeah, it takes a coming together of two people's imaginations, if you like, you know, to see the same vision that is a very powerful, potent sort of hook. Yeah, anyway.
So we touched on rules briefly. Each one of you have made films that have very kind of strict rules and might be in kind of different worlds or our own world. How do you come up with these rules and these kind of ways of connecting things?
It's hard at this level to say what the rules are, but I do look for, you know, when you get this far sort of in and now it has to come back out, because it has to turn into a movie and a process. And so there have to be rules of engagement as to what you're going to do with your job. What is it going to be? When you were in UK and you ran up against that form of reality and it starts pushing back and you weren't fully prepared, but then that's where you become resourceful to understand something where you're going to go to another level. I think that's where we all hit in a movie. I think all movies do, but I think we, particularly being there in the beginning and going through this process, allows us to have a little bit, even though we don't think we're being reflective about it in the moment, it's sort of cumulative to be at a stage. We're going to set the stage for, you know, the movie literally to be filmed, digitally or physically or virtually or however it's done. But we're also, you know, that word has two different meanings. There's setting the stage. The stage can be for setting the stage conceptually for a good idea, but then there's the stage of the movie. So when you ask, like, what would be the rules of engagement in the story that I'm trying to tell about my experience on a singular movie, but that's representative of maybe most of the movies that I've worked on and also the processes that I've discovered, and trying to distill what that is. Now I realize I'm looking, well, where am I, right? I'm working, I've got the boards and I got people on board with the concepts of how we're gonna do this. Now we have to do the work. So I realized that where my brain went was to your 5 crystals. And now I'm at the 5th level. And actually it's the 5th I realized is, oh, this is the fifth thing I'm saying. But I'm drawing from your crystals that have meaning to you, but now they have meaning to me. Because now they're helping me to organize where I am, and that's going to lead actually ultimately to who I am, back to where I started this, but with a bigger question in the beginning. So how did that manifest at that fifth level was it became a split again, because the movie was being made in Los Angeles on virtual volume, computer creation, and then the physical build down in New Zealand, and then of course checking in with Weta down in New Zealand on both the digital side and the physical sides that they were helping, and the entire country was being mobilized. You know, there was no industry except for what you had created, but now a science fiction movie was coming in, and there was no CNC, way of cutting complex science fiction kinds of sets. So the whole country found how to do it. A couple things got done in China, parts to come in. And so now I was splitting my time between that reality in New Zealand and LA, going back and forth. And in the beginning, that wasn't too hard in the sense, because I was back into my split, right? But at a certain point, I felt like I was, because it was a long time, and going back and forth, I had logged enough, time in air. I started to think that's like, well, cumulatively, that's like an astronaut. It was up, like, in a course of 6 months, I was up in the air for over 2 weeks. So that was my minding the gap, but now it became physical. And now you're dealing with these two sides. I never, in those days, would trust the email exchanges because it was a little cruder than it is now, but maybe not, because people would say, I would say, well, did you communicate that we have these changes, to the people in New Zealand, so they know what to do? And then someone said, well, yeah, I sent an email. And I said, well, did you get a response? Did you talk to anybody? And down there, I mean, they at that time, what was so great is that Kim Sinclair was the supervising art director, and Neil, the construction guy, said, we can't build from these drawings you're sending us. And so they redrew everything to be like a third less complex. And here was the great thing, a third less precocious. And then when Jim walked on the set, he went, oh my God, I believe every inch of these sets. And so the translation back and forth, it was strenuous, but I feel like it's at the heart of that. I still can feel the physicality of the movie, but what was driving my ability to do it was this other level I'd reached, because now it's personal. I'm going to survive this. And anyway, that's... Sorry.
Sorry, distracted. So talking about rules and, maybe it's a prop or the world itself, like how do you work on creating the rules and the confines of the space?
Like on an actually really basic level, I get masses of reference, like tons of things that I'm drawn to that I may not even know why. And I put them all up around me, and then I identify what is repeating and what do I keep returning to. Like on the favourite, I kept having octagonal shapes everywhere. Like there's just constant, like there were things that I just kept thinking made sense. I don't know why. I remember looking it up, what is the meaning of the octagonal shape? Thinking, why do I keep planting it? And it actually was harmony or something like that, and I was like, well, kind of. But anyway, it looked nice. It seemed to work for me, but that's how I do it. I love making rules, actually. I really love stripping my work back to like essential components and thinking this is, like in a way it becomes like a spine, like having a rule, like in this, like I remember doing Mary Magdalene and having this moment, was my aha moment, where I realised there will be no furniture in this film. There's no furniture. They never sit on anything. There's nothing, there's no tables. And when I did that, I just felt this relief, like, I have a rule to follow, like, the whole way through. Plus, I also give those rules to my team, and there's an economy to me saying, this film has this, or this film doesn't have this, or look for this particularly, or, I do it a lot with palette as well, actually. I've made a few movies that have been very tight with palette, and yeah, there's something concise. I like being concise. I have been less concise in recent years, I know that, with Cruella. But my preference is to be concise with my work, yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Interesting question about rules. I remember a conversation I had with Peter in the very, very early days of prep for Lord of the Rings. And, the story obviously takes place in Middle-earth. And we were talking about, what is this place? Obviously it has connotations and reference to actual European history, even though it's supposedly some other world. It's histrionics and it's sort of it's got a very sort of English take to it. He said, but of course it's a place that has orcs and it has dragons and all these sorts of things. And so he said to me that it's a alternative reality. It's the real thing, but it's not the real thing at the same time. But it's got to be real. It's got to be real, and for us to believe in orcs and in magic and things like that, we have to believe the world is real. Otherwise, nothing else. It has a sort of a knock-on effect if we don't believe in this place. So it got me thinking, sort of subsequent to that, over the next 20 years of creating these worlds, that there needs to be a sort of a tangible physics to these places that I create. Even though no, actually, I'll step back a bit. I was looking at the slides just before the talk started, and I was noticing that there was slides of for my work with Edoras, the great hall where King Theoden sits. Very well described in the book of the Two Towers. And then the next slide that came up was a slide from The Green Lantern, which is a DC, based on a DC comic. The script was written in a very sort of, I would describe it as quite a laissez-faire way of describing the world. Hal Jordan flies through space, goes through a wormhole, and ends up in the middle of the universe and a sort of a UN of the middle of space. Very undefined and with no history and no context and no sort of backstory or anything like that. So I found myself spending a lot of time creating that in my own imagination, for us to be able to conjure up some images of what this UN in space is going to be. I spent a disproportionate amount of time trying to imagine what alien creatures would look like in a DC world, what their buildings might look like, given that some of them can fly, some of them are huge, some of them are insects, some of them have got a face of a fish, and it was a very tricky kind of conceptual thing to wrap my head around. So it's interesting that, as I mentioned before, that creating something that people can believe means that I have to create something that is already known in a way, that people can feel that they can believe, So yeah, I'm not sure, again, if that was a good answer to the question, but you know, there's those sorts of rules of giving something depth, giving something perspective, history, and weight through all those things that I look for.
Anything to add, or I'll go to questions? Anything to add, or I'll go to questions? Yeah.
One more round.
Just for me, and I hope for us, and that it's cumulative. The kind of final level of this, I think, is there an epiphany to this? Is it this come together to what I'm talking about to mean anything other than that we made a movie? And that's not a small thing to make a movie. I'm not trying to minimize that, and I haven't obviously described, even within this one movie, how broad the jobs were and all the people and the collaboration. But the epiphany was, as I have described, the traversing the dualities. And I didn't get this right away with Jim, but after maybe a year and a half, I began to understand that I could actually, the epiphany was what the epiphany for me always is. And it always goes back to, well, it was most significantly, believe it or not, expressed by the Beatles. And that's why this morning kind of meant something. You know, it's like the message came through. It was like, well, look what you're doing. And the epiphany was the line that I'd heard when I was 17 in the song, I Am the Walrus, that John Lennon sang, in which he spins this first identity sort of associative coming together of I am he, as you are he, as you are me, and we are all together. So there's a way to take that disparateness, even 3 levels of it, and eventually bring something together. And in this particular case, it was when I began to really understand, and I did ask Jim about this. I said, how can you write like what Neytiri says and what Ewa is about, and the Navi culture and all this connectedness, and have all this vision for a world in which things come together and actually are in harmony, or at least that's what's sought, and there's an understanding. And yet the flip side is Quaritch and all that militarism and all that destruction. So, you know, the first is blue, the second is orange, and they're in conflict continuously. But he believes in both of them. Both of those sides are in him. And as I began to understand who he was, and then could ask him kind of directly, because we had a few encounters since I had been a conscientious objector in the 1960s against the Vietnam War, and that was what the story was about, is a character who becomes a conscientious objector who renounces his own species. I mean, that's what Quaritch says to him. Are you going off the reservation, soldier? And he does. And he actually goes into this other world where he finds something that he can believe in ethically, morally, and it's not even, it's more humane than his own race. And that transference, what I would talk to Jim about is that I think I've experienced that at times, and starting back when I was young. So the epiphany was that I was Jim, I was Jake, and we were all together, and also with the whole crew. It was psychological, but it started to resonate. So that's why I brought up the experience of coming up here this morning, because I was drawn into, on a Sunday, something that was spiritual and faith on this island. And then the Beatles kind of came in and said, you know, look where you are, and now come and address this group of people with us all together, you know, trying to express the same thing, I think, but just from our various points of view.
So at this point, I'll open it up to questions, but if you could keep it on the topic of world building, that would be fantastic. As we could go off anywhere. Yeah.
So you talked about rules you set for yourself, but I was wondering if there are rules you get beforehand from the team, like with Star Wars, the world has already been built in parts, if that stifles your creativity.
So the question was, in terms of rules, are you often given rules already by the team or the director, and how do you deal with those?
I was once. I remember being told by David Michaud when we were making The King that he wanted it all whitewashed or something. And I was like, okay. But then actually, it was really good because I was made to go in a way that I probably wouldn't have gone. And it ended up being really dark anyway. I didn't put any lights on, so it was fine.
Sorry, just trying to understand the question for me, but were you asking where, am I given rules by the director? Yeah, well I am. I'm given a brief, I'm given a script, I'm given parameters, I'm given a business model to be able to fit into for time and resources and all that sort of stuff, those sort of practical things, but some directors, and they're all different from each other. Some directors I would categorise them as being actors directors or an editor's director or an art department director, and so they all sort of have their own bent in a way of how they're going to approach the film. And some of them come to me at the beginning with very strong ideas about what they want to do, and other people have no idea what the visuals are going to be like. So it's very interesting to sort of take on board these different personalities and different ways of working. A lot of people have a different way of coming to the job, and directors in particular are the ones that I collaborate with mostly, and same with directors of photography, have the different ways of doing things. So, yeah, in short, sometimes they come with a very clear idea about what they want to do, and sometimes not. So, yeah.
Next question, please.
Hi. As we're talking about building worlds on screen, I was just thinking about how everything we create impacts everyone that watches it. So people that look like us, people that don't look like us. And I was thinking about just asking the question about creating worlds that are that keeping in mind that we have an impact on everyone, and how we can create a world that isn't so homogenous. I'm seeing more and more films that do have more and more people that look like me and that don't look like me. But I guess the question is, where in the process can we make an impact on that decision making, and how can we do that?
So if I understand the questions, at what point can you make an impact on making the world more diverse and, yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm a slave to the script in many ways, and my job is to make that real and to manifest that. But I do find myself being a little more choosy these days as I get older, as I toboggan down the slope of morobundity, as they say. But I shy away personally from violent films now. I think that the world needs to, and without wanting this to be a moral message, but the world needs to get rid of guns the way it's getting rid of smoking and alcohol and things like that. So I try to not get involved in projects that I know are going to be difficult for me to spend a chunk of my life on. But in terms of putting a sort of moral message into the world building, you know, I'm doing it, and I guess somehow or other my personality is going to go into that. But I really have to take my lead from the producers and the directors in terms of how they want to pitch it, because it's over and above world building, there's the film itself. You know, there's the message of the film itself, and I think it's a little bit be precocious of me to you know, influence it too much. Yeah, I hope that's the right thing to say, but.
Early on, I remember I was offered a feature years ago. Before I was a production designer, I was kind of hedging my bets, and so I was seeing which way it would go, and so I was costume designing, and because I did that for theatre. And I got sent a script that was like really sexist, like horrendous, like horrible scenes with women being mistreated. And I remember thinking, oh, this could be my first feature. And then I just thought, I just remember thinking, but I don't want to be there that day. Like, I don't want to be on set when that's happening. I don't want to talk to that actress about, so is it this thong or this thong? You know, I don't want to be that person who does that. And so I just made that like a rule, that if there's anything in a script that I think I don't want to be there that day, then I won't do that film. And so I try to keep away from just things that I personally, yeah, it's kind of a similar thing. It's like, it's about my personality, really, is like my barometer. So, yeah, I just think about that. Do I want to be there that day, or will I be embarrassed on my own behalf? So, yeah.
I think my point of reference there would be that as long as I felt that I wanted to do the movie, from what the story was and who I was making the movie with and the characters and their story, then to offer up what would make it a richer movie in terms of, the director and the producers in the studio will probably determine the casting of the leads, but then what is the rest of the world like, and in terms of the not just the characters, of course, but their environment, and how would that look, and what are the traditions that would come from. I was speaking earlier with Akin about that, some visions that he had and ideas some ideas about West Africa and reconceptualizing an urban environment, which was not really so much urban in the sense as we think about skyscrapers. And then what would that mean? What would that have come from? What would the traditions that led to that be? That seems to me to be a path that a production designer can be effective in opening up the points of reference that the movie's expressing, at least in terms of the world, and then hopefully the casting that goes along with that, and the culture that's expressed.
Next question.
Thank you. Hi. Does it work? Hi. So I have also more question about your career. So in your career, obviously, you've made like very, very big projects, but looking back at your career, when you did smaller projects, would you say that the worlds you were building back then were more you or more artistic than the bigger projects you did? And would you say that at some point in your life you should have maybe said, I would more go into smaller art house productions rather than the big Hollywood productions? Do you know what I mean? So is it a bit clear that, like, do you think you would have built better worlds in smaller sets rather than the big things you did? That clear?
So in terms of world building, at the start of your career, when you were doing smaller projects, for example, did you find them to be more you? And maybe you've lost that as time has gone by? That was the question.
I don't feel that way. I feel that for myself, I've gotten to such a diverse array of movies at various scales that as I was trying to depict, I'm always looking for the authenticity, no matter how big the project is and what my part in. That's why it made me so nervous to start this and only talk about my process to try to find myself in the movie, no matter what the scale of it. So I do enjoy large movies and collaborating, but I also, like last year, got to do a movie that's coming out that Steven Spielberg has made. It's autobiographical, and it's about his upbringing and how his parents affected who he was, their relationships, and how he became an artist and a filmmaker. And so it's quite an intimate story, and I guess we are both at that stage of our lives, so we're looking at that. But it was all done in Los Angeles, and it was quite for Steven anyway, a small production. But I've always looked to try to be as in however big the world is, to find myself in it, and as to why I can relate to it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I've only made one really big film. I'm on my second big film at the moment, so I'm not well versed in this. But I think they all have, well, they're all my stuff. You know, I don't know. I feel like there's no real that I feel like I'm maybe connected with an experience more. Because, I mean, like, you know, like literally I was in the mud making Macbeth, so therefore that's very sort of, I remember that fight. And so there was a lot more, yeah, I guess that I was really, I don't know, connected to some of those early processes in a different way to when you are in a big studio and you've got however many stages and you've got masses of people running around and there's a kind of a different energy to it. But I don't think that they're, yeah, I mean, I actually loved it all. I love it all, yeah.
Yeah, interesting question, because I do work on large ones and small ones, you know, one after the other. So to me, it's to do with the quality of the story and the quality of the message that the story's conveying, that I get a buzz out of. It's not scale per se. I mean, I do love making expensive sets and big sets, but it's not always as satisfying as doing something small that's really got something to say, you know. So I think over time, I personally have struggled to remember some of the earlier films that I do, because you have to expel these things out of your imagination to be able to, you know, fill it up again for the next job. But you know, I think there's been, I've been reflecting on my ability to, or yeah, my method of working now is a little more sort of holistic and sort of, I'm getting a better appreciation of an entire film's design rather than the individual pieces that go into it, if you know what I mean. You know, I'm working on condensing and you know, it's kind of formulating the overall film a lot more successfully than I used to do. So you know, I'm progressing a little bit. But yeah, I don't think it matters to me, large or small. I put the same amount of effort in, you know, on a first film, you know, for $5 million than I do for the other end of the scale. So you know, they're both equally satisfying for me.
So we've got time for one more question, so make it good. Front left or no?
Thank you for that. It was really interesting to hear about like your wealth of experiences and what you draw inspiration from. But a lot of it, because you've had so much experience, you guys have worked all over the world, it is very introspective, it seems like, and you're drawing inspiration from research and you have a big team. But I'm just wondering, like, nowadays, is there ever a moment where you've, like, or a time or something you do to push yourself out of your comfort zone and, like, I don't know, maybe even if it's in your neighborhood and it's a weird low-ceilinged sports bar that has massive TVs that only certain locals, like, go to and you're kind of intimidated by it, like, do you just make yourself walk in every now and then to kind of, like, turn yourself on your head or kind of, you know, feel uncomfortable, like, in reality, like, not imagining something that maybe people won't get, but, like, in reality, just, like, talking to someone you're scared of, or, I don't know, something like that.
So to promote inspiration, do you find yourselves pushing yourselves into strange and uncomfortable scenarios and situations?
Yeah, it's. I'll answer it in my own way. I've used the carrot and stick kind of method to get through a film. I sometimes wake up terrified that what is going to happen on that day, and other days I wake up elated. And so, you know, it's a big responsibility being a production designer. A lot of people are putting their faith in me in this instance to create this world that's very ephemeral. It's sort of here today and gone tomorrow. And so it's not without its anxieties and tensions, I've got to say. But at the same time, as I mentioned at the very beginning, you need to sort of have balls of steel in some ways. I heard an interesting quote a while back. It's if at first you don't succeed, don't try skydiving. So, you know, but you do have to take the plunge, you know, every day. Yeah, anyway.
I was just going to say that my, like, sort of discomfort, or the way that I do that to myself, is actually with the projects that I choose. And I'm trying to always choose things that, places I haven't been before creatively. And so I'm, you know, looking for scripts or directors or people that I think are going to challenge me. And that is invigorating, and it's kind of I'm trying to shift shape a bit, but it means that I get to, through my work, travel to places that, I'm doing sci-fi at the moment. So I'm traveling to places that, you know, I would never travel to, and that's keeping it fresh and interesting, yeah.
I'm actually, at the core of it, always uncomfortable. And I think that what I've tried to convey is, I think I've over the years learned to convey that I'm somehow calm and I got it together. And so that uncomfortability, that fortunately, again, it's a vulnerability, but I've found out how it can be a strength in the process of making a movie. As chaotic and fearful as the world is, when you get to make a movie, there's actually a way of controlling that chaos from a blank slate almost into a form that takes the form of a movie, and it's projected out and it goes to wherever it goes. People receive it, it goes into wherever, but for you, it ends up probably a disc on your shelf, and there was that life's experience. And you actually, for me, I feel like that's where I faced my fears, faced my uncomfortability, and fortunately, that's the level that particularly with Stephen and Bob, but also, as I've tried to say, even with Jim and JJ, those are the four basic directors, like the Beatles. That I got to share that level of how difficult it is. And just to leave it on this note, Steven Spielberg specifically talks about that he can't make a movie unless he's afraid of it, because that's what brings him the next step into what he wants to do artistically, but also reflects something that's real in his life. So I guess that's the best I could describe always being uncomfortable. But, you know, I can end on this part just to say, do you remember those of you who ever saw a movie called Lawrence of Arabia? And there's a wonderful scene in which, I think this is where David Lean is showing us how he is. And that's like a code, which is he's always making a flame and he's putting his hand over it. And then somebody says, well, doesn't that hurt? And he says, of course it hurts. The trick is to not mind it.
That's a fantastic place to end. So I just wanted to thank our sponsors, Roscoe, and our fantastic panel.